Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sachdev, and some of fintech's hardest hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today we're joined by Jakub Zakrzewski, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, who's Chief Growth Officer in Residence at Techstars Berlin. Jakub, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, hey Shamir, hi everyone else. Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Jakub, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your journey so far, and how you've ended up as Chief Growth Officer in Residence?
As you've mentioned, I'm currently the Chief Growth Officer in Residence at Techstars in Berlin. I've recently relocated to Europe after almost a decade living in Asia altogether. So that's also a fun experience and an interesting case, especially when you compare these two cities, Singapore, where I spent majority of my time, and now Berlin. Both very unique and very cool in their own sense. I've actually started my career after business school in a company called Lazada. That was the copycat of Amazon in Southeast Asia. So that's the reason how a Polish guy ended up on the other side of the earth. And that was awesome. The company has been growing like crazy. I was working and leading business intelligence and also digital marketing. So that kind of helped me see firsthand what hypergrowth really means and how it looks like under the hood. So this is how it all started. And I was extremely lucky also that very early in my career, I actually found something that I really enjoyed doing. And at the same time, it seemed like I was not bad at, which is growing and scaling internet companies. Something that right now seems super hot, probably the best place to be in. It didn't look like this 10 years plus ago. So I was also lucky to be to start my career there and to really see and work in something that I enjoy doing. After being in that company that successfully then exited, in the unicorn route to a big Asian e-commerce company, I've actually joined a company as a very early employee with joined two of my colleagues that were building a B2B logistics startup in Hong Kong. And they were looking for someone to initially head up ops and then head up and start growth, which was great because I had no idea about Hong Kong, no idea about B2B, and no idea about logistics. But yeah, you figure things out pretty quickly if you have to. That was very early. The company was just getting started. They got their pre-seed funding from one of the top investors, initially heading up and building up operations, and then building out from scratch growth. So making sure that the company can be extremely successful. That was great, but coming from a financial background and seeing how much of an impact digitalization can have on these industries, which is e-commerce and then logistics. Deep inside, I wanted to kind of come back to the basics where my education was and what I was studying in business school, which is finance. And when you connect the dots, you see how much things can be done cheaper, faster, with a better experience in these other industries. And I've experienced firsthand how bad financial services were at that point of time in Asia, in some of the countries. You kind of connect the dots and see that the biggest opportunity out there that you would love to be a part of was actually fintech. So this is how I joined Revolut. And that was probably one of the best decisions of my life. So that was 2017. I moved to London. I was part of the international expansion team. After a few months, I kind of moved back to Singapore, and I was leading the Revolut's launch and growth in Singapore, as well as growth in APAC. So I spent overall 2.5 years with Revolut, majority of that time in APAC. And after that, I knew that I wanted to stay in fintech. I knew that this is the industry that I really liked, and there was still so much to do. And I had a blast being at the right place at the right time and catching this wave with Revolut and Neobank in 2017. So I was thinking within fintech, if I had to choose the next wave that would be as big as neobanking was, what would it be? And I thought that crypto can be something that I would love to learn more about. And it seemed to me to have a really big potential to be the next wave with fintech. So I was very lucky to, after 2.5 years with Revolut, to join Kraken as the managing director in Singapore. My role over there was to initially look after the APAC growth for the company, which was mainly in Japan and in Australia. And then I started looking at international growth for the company. And my last role there was to be a general manager. So overall, it was a fantastic experience, and I spent 3 years at Kraken altogether. And then after that, I left Kraken. I left Singapore. I moved to Berlin, and I've joined right now Techstars. And as we discussed previously, as their chief growth officer in residence, which is an easy task to make every single company in the newest batch of acceleration to make them a unicorn. So this is my main KPI right now, and this is what I've been focusing on for the past few months.
I've got lots of questions about the expansion at Revolut and your role at Kraken. But before we jump into that, I'd really like to sort of talk about what you're doing at the moment at Techstars. So I think a kind of a good place to start is what does it actually mean to be a chief growth officer in residence? What is that role? What are your responsibilities? And, where do you add value, to startups?
Most importantly, my role is just to make sure that every one of these companies is set up for success and set up for potential hypergrowth trajectory with the product that they're building, the problem that they're solving, and the way that they want to structure their growth. Most of these companies are at a pretty early stage, which means they need to ensure that the product that they're building is actually solving a problem that is big enough for other people to pay for. So if you break it down, my job is a lot about helping them really understand their product market fit and understand if the problem that they're trying to solve with their product actually exists, if it's big enough, and if it's really important enough for other people to pay for. I think these are the fundamentals of building basically any business. And if you don't get these basics right, then it's very hard to scale basically any company. The saying to build a painkiller, not a vitamin, is also something that I try to embed in the companies, especially in times when the barriers to enter in any single market, if you're a software company, are becoming smaller and smaller. You need to have some sort of defensibility, some sort of unfair advantage, and you need to be tackling a big problem with a solution that makes sense in order to further scale. So this is basically the step number one on this. The step number two is basically figuring out how to get the first few clients for these two startups. And I think the most important things there is just to do things that really don't scale. Try to get people that you have a very strong conviction that they're going to be the ones that actually have the biggest problem that you're solving, and making sure that you also listen to them and understand if you're thinking about building this particular company changes in any way. If there's anything else that you're learning from the market that you should be incorporating in building your product. So that's step number two. And then step number three, it's what is the playbook of hypergrowth? Whenever you already have the validated product market fit, you already can tell that by having clients that actually pay you for your product. How do you achieve this hypergrowth? Where do you start? What are the channels? How do you structure and build a team around that? If I had to break it down, these are probably the three biggest components where I sit down with the teams and brainstorm together. What I love is that many of them are actually outside of fintech and crypto. So it's a breath of fresh air for me to tackle problems together with them in industries that I'm not an expert in. So this sharpens your skills and sharpens your principles about what actually makes sense and what is the advice that is industry agnostic, that works for fintech, crypto, and what are the principles of building a company and then to scaling it and growing it to potentially a unicorn. Sounds easy, and this is exactly what I'm doing with every single company that it's in the batch at Techstars in Berlin.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think I'm sort of most interested in is, and I think for a lot of our listeners, that they will kind of they will have a product, they will have a concept. They probably have their first handful of users, so they've kind of done that piece there. But I think the biggest sort of challenge comes around is that distribution piece and kind of hitting hyper growth. I mean, we can kind of discuss in a bit whether growth is still the main KPI that, say, investors are looking at the moment. But for all intents and purposes, how do these fintech brands acquire users? And one of the things that you mentioned was building a team and how to structure a team. I'd love to really hear your thoughts around, I suppose, two things really. One, deciding on what your team should look like and who needs to be in that team. And then two, deciding what distribution or acquisition channels should form part of the marketing mix in order to drive user acquisition to obviously attain that growth?
The way that I like to think about it is the way that you're structuring your team should be reflecting the North Star metric that you have, and should also reflect the problem that you're trying to solve by knowing where your customers really are. And this is obviously very nuanced and depends on the type of business you're in. But supposedly, you know that if you're in B2B, and you already have a very limited number of potential clients that are very high ticket, certainly putting ads on TikTok is probably not the best strategy to acquire these users. Hence, having someone that is going to be doing digital marketing with a specialization in running TikTok ads or Instagram ads is not something that you need to hire for. So hiring needs to be coming from a perspective of knowing who your clients are, which is the number one. Point number two is knowing where they are, what they do, and how to find them. And then number three is whenever you know that, you can actually figure out how am I gonna get their attention. And as we know, when it comes to growth or marketing, it's all about getting people attention that can be the potential clients for your business. And you reverse engineer, and based on this, you know who to hire. In B2B, it's very clear to me that in most of the B2B companies, there needs to be a sales and BD component in order to be closing deals and getting growth through this way. But if you're a B2C company, probably doing sales is not the best strategy. You need to figure out other means of getting the audience that is actually most interested in your product. The good way to think about it is whose problem you're actually solving and how can you find them, or where can you find them. And by this, structuring the channels that have to be very specific to finding these people. And if you already have a good hypothesis on where to find them, that kind of drives who you need to hire. And again, it has to be coming from a place where you're building a team of people that can actually solve this particular issue, of people that have expertise in this particular channel, that know exactly how to get the right people's attention. I would say hiring comes probably third in this whole process of figuring out who my customers are, where they are, and how I find them.
That obviously then shares DNA with the second part of that question, which is, choosing, your distribution method or your acquisition method. Obviously, you don't have to name company names, but I'd be really interested in, hearing about almost like the vast differences between sort of acquisition methods for perhaps some of the different companies that you've worked with. And I suppose the aim of that question is to, give the listeners an idea of, kind of the avenues out there. It's not all about, and I'm speaking very biasly, running an agency. It's not all about performance marketing and influencer marketing, but there are other channels out there. It can be great to hear kind of your side of that, seeing, speaking from the perspective of someone who's seeing a range of companies, across a portfolio.
Sure. So I don't want to get too specific in giving examples either from cohorts or from companies that I've worked at. But on a very high level, if you take an average B2B company and average B2C company, there are probably different ways that are more effective in order to really find the best clients for your product. And obviously, if you want to reach hyperscale, it is better in B2C to think about channels that actually offer this asymmetry of potential upside. When it comes to word of mouth, when it comes to potential network effects. And this is definitely something that if I was a B2C founder, I would focus on, just to make sure that I can push this virality effect and the network effect somehow into my product. When it comes to B2B, just given the nature of B2B, your ticket size can be many times higher compared to B2C. Your lifetime value of clients compared to B2C can be sometimes 10x, 1000x, depending on industry, which gives you much more room to maneuver when it comes to figuring out how do I spend the money from my customer acquisition cost in order to get this deal. And obviously, then looking at the North Star metrics in growth, which is LTV and CAC ratios, the CAC payback times, etc. So B2B gives you a lot more room to maneuver when it comes to spending funds on acquiring clients. And it's much more nuanced, and it has also many more touch points in order from the initial touch point to basically closing the deal. And as you've mentioned, not everything needs to be about influencer marketing and performance marketing, which we've seen many companies running this playbook, especially for B2C in times where money was everywhere, and having easier access to money also means that the investors could give you money for you to spend on ads in order to acquire users. I think we're not at this time as of now, at least this year, maybe next year as well, where money is everywhere. So you need to think about things and avenues for B2C to grow in a more asymmetrical way. And for B2B, given the size of tickets that you have And closing deals means also getting approvals from many people in the company, which means that the service needs to be much more white glove. You need to invest in your branding much more and get out there and find clients that are in your very specific niche, which means from a thought leadership perspective, it means content and really nailing your SEO strategy, because probably PPC is not going to be the best way for you in order to really scale at a very low customer acquisition cost. It means also events, it means conferences, and it means a lot in BD and sales. Obviously, it's very hard to nail, a very generic playbook for any company in B2B and any company in B2C. And I don't think anyone should be looking at it from this perspective, but everyone should be always looking at it from where my potential clients are, who are my perfect clients, and how do I find them? And then figuring out and having a good hypothesis, testing that out, and then seeing, what sticks, what doesn't stick. And what is important is, where do I find my highest LTV clients, and that I don't have to wait many years in order to close. Having a good hypothesis, testing that out across different channels, then seeing the performance and adjusting the performance along the way is probably the only way to really figure out what are the best distribution channels for your particular business. Every business is different, whether B2B or B2C, depending on the vertical, depending on the industry. That's why it has to have a tailored approach. There can be some principles and framework that allow you to structure that initially, but then later on it's all about testing, getting the results, adjusting, and double downing on what works best.
That's a key point you touched on. I think the testing element is so key, right? One thing you kind of mentioned was money's not as freely available as it has been. And so therefore, marketers aren't in a position to spend budget in the way that they were spending in paid performance marketing defense. It can still be effective, obviously, but it's just perhaps being a little more focused on the data, a little bit more optimized, really, drilling down on the quality of customer that you're driving in and being really mindful of the sort of volumes that you can drive in from performance. But I suppose my question is particularly, it's a bit of a cheeky question, really, particularly being the chief growth officer, noting that the market's changed. Is growth still desirable for investors? Or are investors looking more at profitability now? Have you noticed a change in that in terms of prepping your portfolio companies that you're working with?
The biggest focus that I have when it comes to working together with the founders is just building good businesses. So investors and fundraising is one thing, but what is the most important for me is to tackle big problems, to create solutions that people want, and then figuring out how to solve the cold start problem, getting initial traction, and then making sure that there's a framework, structure in place, a roadmap in place, both from the product and growth perspective to actually build a sustainable business. What investors are looking at, this is something that I think about and we discuss with founders, but most importantly, it's about building great businesses. And how do we make sure that we're adding value for clients? How do you make sure that you think about building a company being always putting customers first and being customer obsessed, and really figuring out what clients want and shipping great product, and then making sure that this product-led growth approach you can double down on with and add fuel, whether it's on sales, on marketing, or anywhere else. But it's very hard to scale anything that's it's not a great product. And whenever you have a great product from a growth perspective, you're actually benefiting from the channels that we've discussed previously. You're benefiting from word of mouth. You're benefiting from all kinds of other network effects where other people are actually your advocates and they're marketing your product for you. And this is the place where you want to be. So I spend a lot of time on working this out together with the founders and making sure that they're set up for success in these earlier stages where they are. They also have a growth mindset and thinking of testing quickly, validating assumptions and hypotheses very quickly, adapting, getting back to the game if they've been knocked down, etc. Because it's not easy to build companies at earlier stages. You need to fight against the odds. So you need to minimize your risk that are just happening and distractions that are just happening along the way in these earlier days.
100% agree with you there. You mentioned network effects, product marketing, and then getting founders into that growth mindset of test and learn, rapidly and quickly. How you help founders kind of organize this within their businesses, because obviously product, as we know, kind of comes first. The product's been built, marketing kind of gets added on to obviously promote the product. How do you get that conversation, going between sort of marketing and product to help create that infrastructure or foster that environment of rapid test and learn? And then sort of a part two of that question, how do you go about helping build a product that has a network effect?
What is most important is whenever you put your clients' needs first and you look at what problems they have and you really think deeply about what is the best way to solve these issues, this is something that really helps you navigate and prioritize things accordingly when it comes to putting your roadmaps together. Obviously, there has to be a balance between how much time I'm spending on acquiring new users versus how much time I'm spending building out the product and adding new features. In my opinion, initially in the very early stages, your product should be your best marketing channel out there. And what I mean by this is whenever you actually have the best product initially, and you do something that no one else does, and you're better at than anyone else, and you're cheaper at the same time than anyone else in the market, where information is just so easy to get. It's way easier for you to double down on growth versus just double downing on growth and trying to put something that it's half baked. So it's definitely art and science to it, but the way to really solve it is just to put your customer first, to really obsess about the problems that your potential customers have, and try not to just throw things out there, both from marketing, sales perspective, and product perspective, and see if they stick. I think what is most important is to have in mind your clients, have in mind their problems, and think really deeply about the best way to make life easier for your clients. And it doesn't matter if it's B2B or it's B2C. If you are really honest with yourself and you really understand what are the issues out there that your product aims to solve, things become way easier on scaling. And the other way around, it's always something that will be harder. So this is the way that I think about it, and this is how we're working together with founders on ensuring that this is something that they keep in their minds. That many of them come from different backgrounds, they have great experiences, but this framework about thinking about the issue helps them navigate prioritization, product roadmap, and I'm pretty sure that many of them will hear them in the foreseeable future as successful companies.
I kind of want to dig into your roles at Revolut and,
sure.
and Kraken. If we kind of start with Revolut, I think the key thing there is that you're fundamentally leading the launch of Revolut's operations into Singapore. We work with a number of fintech firms who are kind of launching into new territories, new areas, and we're always having conversations around this with various firms. I was wondering if you could kind of just talk to me about your experience, perhaps some of the issues that you've encountered. Have you sort of pulled together your own playbook for launching into a new territory? Do you have sort of any, key insights that you'd be willing to share?
There was definitely a playbook, and I think it was probably one of the best playbooks that was out there at that point of time when it comes to launching, and I'm sure that it's extremely valuable on how to drive growth in new markets. It helped to streamline subsequent launches for Revolut, and I'm sure that this is something that the company is working constantly on improving, making it better, something that just helps them clarify thinking about what is the best way to actually do that. So 100% on this. Singapore was actually, I think, officially the first launch for Revolut outside of Europe. So a lot of things that we've done together with my colleagues was actually for the first time. So there was a lot of learning and a lot of adjusting and doing things for the first time and solving problems for the first time that no one else has actually solved previously in the industry. So that is always fun and definitely challenging. But if you like a good challenge, that was definitely a good place to be at. One of the interesting problems that we've had is initially, especially in a country like Singapore, people like to follow still pretty standard career path when it comes to being a consultant, being an investment banker, etc. When it comes to more business-related degrees, there was definitely a lot of work that needed to be done in order to convince the top talent to join. That was some years ago, so I think the trend is shifting more towards tech companies, and I'm sure fintech is probably one of the best places to be within tech. But at that point of time, there's probably still had to be some extra work done in order to really get the best talent that is out there. And I believe, and I'm sure Revolut believes it's still in the same way. That's why it's so successful. And it's, I'm sure that the mentality is that they're still thinking about themselves as being very early in building a company. In order to really set yourself for success at this level of operating a company, that you're ready to go international, You just need to hire the best people. And these are the people that are going to be making the success of your company in new markets. So I'm sure that this is something that we had to work on, and it was always the aim to hire the top 1% talent, the international market. And I believe that this is the only way to really succeed if you're taking your company internationally, to really nail down this relationship between the headquarter and hire the best people out there for international market. Very few companies have really done this successfully, and in my opinion, and obviously I'm very biased, I think Revolut has done a tremendous job with that.
I think undoubtedly. I think they just announced recently that they've got 30 million customers now.
Yeah,
it's extraordinary, really.
It seems to me, and I don't want to make it a Revolut fanboy podcast, but it definitely seems to me what Revolut is doing is literally the embodiment of growth mindset. You're not stopping. You're not settling. You're always pushing for shipping new products that are the best out there compared to all the other neobank competitors. Even though you have 30 million clients, and I think it was mentioned that they're adding almost 1 million right now a month. They're not stopping. That's the growth mindset. You're out there shipping the best products possible, doubling down with great marketing and great growth. And this is something that creates this culture of pushing, not settling, growing, and creating. And it's a great company. And so I'm really curious where the company is going to be in 5 years' time.
I think everybody's, if they're adding on 1 million users a month at the rate that they're expanding across territories and countries, and if they finally manage to satisfy the Bank of England, kind of everything's to play for Revolut. And I would be somewhat concerned if I was an incumbent bank at the moment.
Maybe some of your listeners are future B2C founders. We've talked about how B2C basically has lower LTVs, and then you need to be very creative in times of money not being so readily available as it used to be few years back. Getting inspired by some of the stories of companies that really were able to pull that one off. Revolut is one of them. I'm sure that prior to Revolut, we had Spotify, had Uber. There are also other apps that are focusing in some other areas that are having tens of millions of downloads. There's a ton of different playbooks, a ton of different strategies that has worked for these companies. So if I was a B2C founder, my approach would not be to copy what they have done, because some of these things might have worked for them, which is a specific company a few years back. So assuming that you do exactly the same thing as they do and it's going to work for you, it's probably not something that I would put very high odds on. But getting inspired about how they thought about growing, how they thought about getting their first clients, how they thought about finding their ideal customer profile, and reverse engineering what are the best ways to actually convince and get them as users. And treat this as potential data points of things that have worked for these particular companies at this point of time, but not think about it as a truth that needs to be followed, but something that you can get inspired and influence to really figure out the thinking about how you can basically put together your own growth strategy. And everyone should keep in mind that you should build that out in a way that maybe if you're extremely successful, some people are going to be looking into you and seeing your strategy and your playbook as potentially successful and getting inspired by it. We already seen quite a few successes, both in B2C, B2B, in Europe, etc. So there's a ton of content out there with good data points on what has worked for these companies. And with the advancements that we're seeing with AI and with no-code tools, I think it's probably the best time to be an entrepreneur right now than ever before.
The biggest thing that I'm seeing that kind of corroborates that is probably the number of one-person companies that are popping up. It's very, very prevalent on Twitter, but individuals with perhaps the aid of a couple of freelancers, some AI and some tools are producing some form of tool, SaaS-based tool or some sort of content-driven sort of product or a service or whatever, and then they're just leveraging the power of the internet to distribute and monetize. And I think they're actually really, really good examples to look at for early stage companies. How you can build an audience and distribute your product and monetize. But then, absolutely, I think in terms of what you're saying, it's also worthwhile looking outside the fintech sector for inspiration how companies have expanded.
And I think just the fact that you can get so much leverage right now just by using all these tools that are available. that you can leverage ChatGPT in so many different ways when it comes to building your company. And you have tools like Zapier that actually allow you to combine a ton of things in the back and make it work without the need of hiring pretty expensive engineers. I think it's just something that subsequently allows people to really ship something, an MVP even, and just to validate potential products earlier than ever. And obviously, if you see that the idea that you had, an MVP that you've built actually is sticky, then you can double down potentially and raise venture funds and think about adding more people. But I think where we are at the moment, which is extremely fascinating, is that it's probably easier and cheaper. It's the cheapest ever to get something out there and just to see if this is the right product to be building. And to the speed of validating it is probably the fastest we've ever seen. So yeah, I'm super bullish on seeing more and more companies that are being built by solopreneurs, as you've mentioned, or started as solo founders, and then just because of the growth, you're able to hire dedicated people to really start scaling up and building even a better product. So yeah, really exciting times.
Yeah, and I think just on your point around building a product in no-code tools, there's one person that's worth following. His name's Ben Tossell, I think it is, and he started MakerPad, which was ultimately ended up being bought by Zapier. And I think one of his first case studies, he built an app using all no-code tools that was a carbon copy of Airbnb.
Yeah,
obviously there's some degree of skill required with that, and he'd done it in a pretty good time frame. But if you think about the cost of doing that versus having to build an MVP, even if you are using offshore talent to help you do that, it's still significant and it's still very, very time consuming. I've got hundreds of examples of one of the first clients that we had, I think they spent $300,000 on their app without validating whether or not customers were interested.
This sounds like the good old days where raising money was way easier than it is probably right now.
Yeah. And it was easier, but they probably could have spent $5,000 doing some sort of prototype and then doing a bit of research and putting it in front of people and saying, hey, what do you think of this? Do you think you'd use it? Or have some sort of no-code version? But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, no, but it's a good point. And so as I said, if your listeners are aspiring entrepreneurs, a good takeaway from our conversation is that it's probably easier than ever right now to build something, to ship it outside, and then if you get this validation that this is actually something that people care about, you can double down. And then we've talked about product roadmaps and product development, as well as adding fuel into growth, marketing, etc., just to make sure that you can actually scale something that people really want.
That mindset is relevant for the companies that are slightly more later stage, where you've developed the product, you have acquired users, but you're now on the verge of trying to scale. And I think the mindset, it needs to be slightly different there. But I think you can make, at that stage, when you're running, say, marketing initiatives, I think as long as you almost like get direction, it doesn't necessarily need to be firm results. I think as long as you've got direction that, actually, yes, we are seeing click-throughs, we are seeing people hit, our site, we are seeing a few downloads. Okay, this looks like an avenue to explore. I'm not saying that you put your entire Series A into a Google Ads account, but what I am saying is that you can start making some really educated decisions as to basically smelling what sells and lean into it.
100%.
If I'm honest, I think we probably only got through about 2/3 of the questions I wanted to get through, and we're rapidly running out of time. Let's kind of end with, I suppose, the quick fire round. But before we do that, one question I do want to ask is, what's next for you?
I'm really enjoying my current role at Techstars. I'm also advising companies on their strategy and growth, and I also find that very fulfilling, being able to solve problems for different companies and to make sure that I can really add value to their executive team is something that I really enjoy doing. I'm also angel investing, so this is also something that allows me to be very close to early stage teams. And who knows what the future will bring. Maybe I will just, given it's so easy to build something right now, maybe I'll just build my own company. So stay tuned.
Cool. Well, before we wrap up, a few questions from our quick fire round. What podcasts are you listening to at the moment?
I'm actually right now reading more books than I'm listening to podcasts. The book that I'm currently reading is called Ready Player One, and that kind of brings me a little bit closer to take a glimpse of what the world could potentially be looking like in the next few years. It gives me peace, and I also enjoy reading to put my head somewhere else after basically solving problems the whole day. I really recommend. I haven't finished yet reading Ready Player One. It seems to be really a cool book. It actually shows you what the world could look like in the next few years, how the future could look like. I don't know if the author was the one that actually came up with the name metaverse or not, but it's definitely something. It definitely shows you how a metaverse could look like, and this is definitely something that many companies are trying to build in currently. This is also something that has attracted a lot of venture money. So I can definitely say that this is a really cool book so far, and I really recommend reading it.
And and you can't say Revolut, what's your favorite fintech app?
I have to say Revolut. There's no other option. If we talk about fintech, it has to be Revolut. So again, not trying to be a Revolut fanboy, but if you think about the criteria by which you would choose one, if you look at the best user experience, best pricing, best new features being shipped probably faster than anyone else out there, it has to be Revolut. So anything else that I would say would be basically a lie.
Fair enough. And then, what's the best bit of life advice you've ever received?
There are very few people and very few instances in life where we're taking advice from people that it's just the boilerplate really works. I'm actually always much more interested in how people think through things through problems, and understand a little bit more about their mental models and frameworks that they're using and the principles that they have, rather than the last step in the funnel, which is basically advice. I think if you give a boilerplate advice, it's very few things that actually work as an advice that you can give generally to people. I think one of the good advice out there is probably related to principles. And I think a good principle to have is always try to think critically about problems and kind of reverse everything else from there. When it comes to solving an issue, when it comes to building a company, I think critical thinking is probably one of the most important skills out there. So it matters less what kind of podcast you're listening to or what are the blogs that you're reading, etc., which is important as data points. But what is most important is actually to have the right way about thinking through these data points and making decisions and having good judgment. So this is something that I'm definitely much more interested in, rather than just like copy and pasting an advice from someone that has very limited data points about the particular problem that I'm solving.
And then my last question, really, what's one thing that I haven't asked you, but perhaps I should have?
We didn't have any question about crypto. I'm sure that could be a podcast episode on its own, basically to deep diving into blockchain and the future of money.
We can probably pull something together. I think we've got a few few prior guests that probably have opinions on that as well. So maybe we can pull together a special feature on that and talk about the future of money.
That's a big one. Actually, would be interesting to see beyond opinions, like what are all the facts that we can all agree on, because crypto is one of this industry that everyone has an opinion on, but it's actually very interesting how if you really look at the facts and really look what the future is, there are some interesting instances where in retrospective this could be inevitable, that there's technology is something that is going to be the backbone for many economies.
Yeah, undoubtedly. It's inevitable. I think the issues come around because cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin were seen as an investment or a punt in some cases, as opposed to what it is, which is a currency. And then obviously you can trade currencies. You can do euro dollar or cable or whatever it is. But fundamentally, no one's buying dollars or buying sterling to make 80% returns or 100% returns. And I think that kind of became the problem with Bitcoin, that it turned from being a currency into an asset, and that kind of caused the issue. But I think the sooner we come to terms with perhaps Bitcoin is going to just trade between $25,000 and $30,000, and actually we start using it for its actual purpose, which is to transfer wealth or wealth transfer, I think that will solve a lot of the issues, really, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to wrap up, and probably a good segue for a future podcast on how to take it from here and to discuss, because it's a topic for actually a PhD thesis, what you've just started. I'm sure it can be a great topic for future discussions.
Amazing. Jakub, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.